We're now going into the last topic in that booklet, section 7 of chapter 5. And here what we're doing is solving quadratic equations by factoring. And this is a good time to think, why were we learning all this factoring? Well, we did multiplying, we did factoring, but where does factoring come in? Well, this is where it comes in, because it gives you a way to solve quadratic equations. Quadratic equations, remember, are ax squared plus bx plus c. That was the standard form of the quadratic expression. But now if we equal it to 0, it becomes the standard form of the quadratic equation. And the main principle for solving these is what we call the zero factor property. That is, if we have a times b, and you can see these are factors that equal 0, the only way that can be true is that either a or b is equal to 0. If a is 0, then that equals 0. If b is 0, that equals 0. Or if both of them are 0, that equals 0. So this is what we call the zero factor property. Now, how does it work? Well, you recall what we've been doing in factoring is ending up with a binomial and times a binomial that earlier we would FOIL to get a trinomial, and we're saying that that equals 0. But now these are factors of that trinomial that it may have come from. So what's the technique we use for solving it? And the answer is we take each of these factors and equal it to 0. So we take each of our factors and equal it to 0. And then we have a little equation. We transpose the 8. That gives me a negative 8. And then we're going to divide by 7. And x is a negative 8/7 for this one. And here we transpose the 5. The negative 5 get a positive 5. Divide by 3, x is 5/3. So what we've done is now we have two solutions for this trinomial that was factored into this. Now every once in a while they're going to give you one that's already factored and it equals 0. So just take the factors, equal it to 0, and then solve those little equations. But in example 3, this is the more typical way you're going to see it. And this is in standard form of the quadratic equation. And the way we're going to solve that is by factoring. So this is x, 7, 3. And now we want to have our middle term be negative, so in order to have that, this one's negative, this one is positive, and then that last step is that x plus 3 equals 0, or x minus 7 equals 0, and here it's just a matter of transposing. X equals negative 3, x equals 7. So again, in summary of this part, we're going to solve quadratic equations that are in standard form by factoring. And for this, we use the zero factor property, where in order for this side to equal 0, one of these factors has to be 0, or they both are. So we want to find out what makes this a 0. Well, we equal this factor to 0, and then we solve. We equal this factor to 0, and we solve. And in most cases, you're going to get a quadratic equation where you have to put it in standard form. This one is, factor it, and then get your solutions. Okay? And by the way, if you put these into the equation, it makes it a true statement. Now, if they were all like the previous examples, that would be really easy. But now they're bringing in some of your skills of solving equations. So step number 1, you recall, is get rid of fractions by multiplying every term by the lowest common denominator, which happens to be 30. So 30 goes into there once, that disappears. Once, 3 times. Once, 10. So we got rid of the fractions. So this is now x squared plus 3x equals 10. Now you might say, what's wrong with this? Well, it's not in standard form. So what do we have to do to put it in standard form? Well, we rewrite it. X squared plus 3x, transpose this 10, on this side it becomes opposite sign, negative 10, equals 0. Now what do? We factor it. And we get x, 5, and 2. And again, we want our middle term to be positive. So this one will be positive, and this one will be negative. It never hurts to FOIL it, to check that it's correct. In fact, anywhere along the way, check your work. And then we're going to have it, I'll write it over here. X minus 2 equals 0, or x plus 5 equals 0. And then we just transpose. And those are our answers. And we usually put the answer set in something like this. Oop. And they'll give that to you in Math Zone. Okay, again, we're trying to show you a variety of different techniques, but all based towards solving quadratic equations by factoring using the zero factor property. And step 1 is always put it in standard form. So this is not in standard form. So I'm going to rewrite it, x cubed plus x squared, transpose the 6x, negative 6x, equals 0. Now we notice we have a common factor of x in each term, just like we did before. So we factor that out. So once again, this was not in standard form, so I had to take this term, bring it to the other side through transposition, change its sign, equal to 0. Now I'm factoring out the greatest common factor, and now I'm going to factor this. Generally, they're not too hard to factor. That's the nice part about it. And I need a plus there, so this will be plus, that'll be minus. Now you notice here we have 3 factors. And that's important because anytime the degree of your equation is to the third power, you're going to need 3 solutions. So how do you do it? Well, it's going to be x equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0, or x plus 3 equals 0. And here that is a solution. Here x will be 2, and here x will be a negative 3. So you write your solution set as 0, 2, negative 3. And any of these, by the way, if you have questions, bring them into the tutors, or ask the teacher, or whatever. Okay, here is getting a review of what we did before. Do you recognize this? This is a perfect square trinomial. So this will factor into something like this. And we'll take, that's going to be 4x minus 5, square root of that, this sign there. We multiply this doublet, we get that, we FOIL it, it works out. So here we have 2 answers that actually are going to be the same, because this can be worked out as 4x minus 5 equals 0. So we transpose the 5 and then divide by 4. So when we have something like this where the answers are the same, we only have to write the solution set once. But notice there were 2 of the same because of this special case. Now as we look at number 12, and you might say, well, the first thing I'm going to do is distribute that. Well, the answer is no, don't do that, because it is 0 on that side is what you want, and these are factors. So it's this times this, so you don't distribute. You leave it like that, otherwise you'd have to factor it. It's already factored. So 5x equals 0, or 9x minus 10 equals 0. So here we divide both sides by 5, so x is 0. That's going to be one solution. Transpose the 10, and then divide by 9. There's your other solution. So we've transposed the 10, became a positive 10, then divided by 9. And the solution set for this one would be 0 and 10 ninths. So as we see this one, this will be the last one I do in this part. And again, if you have questions, bring them in. But as we see, this is an equation. And since this is x squared, we have the idea it's going to be quadratic. And what do you have to do? Remember, the first thing you have to do is put it in standard form so that you could factor it. Because that's the only way at this time we know how to solve quadratic equations. So we're going to distribute. This becomes 4x squared. This becomes a negative 2x. Now, what we're going to do is take our x's from this side, and all the terms from this side, bring them over. This one first. As it comes over as a 5. I'm sorry, as a 1, which we add here as 5x squared. Minus 2x plus 3, bringing that over, and we get that. Now we have to factor this. And since this is prime, we know that that's going to be 5x and x. And they're both going to be negative, so I can get a 3 there. And I can put the 3 there. That's not right. Put the 3 there, yes. So when I do my, hold it for a moment. Okay, I checked the work and I'm saying, wait a minute, this doesn't factor. This doesn't work. So when you end up with something like this, where it doesn't factor, you say there is no solution. I didn't check the answer too well. I should have looked at it. It said in my book, no solution. But I thought it was one that would factor. We did everything right, it just wouldn't factor. And the way we write that is we put a circle with a slash through it, or just leave it empty. No solution for number 15. Okay, number 14. Now as we look at it, is it in standard form of the quadratic equation? And the answer is no. So our first step then is to get it in standard form. So this will be x squared. We have to square this binomial. Multiply these, double it. Square that. Now to put it in standard form, I have to complete combine like terms. I now have to factor out the greatest common factor, which is 2. And I may be going too fast, so let me slow down and review. This is our original example. We want to put it in standard form. So I expanded that into this. I brought this over, subtracted 2 from that, combined like terms there. Then I see I could factor out a 2, which is what I did. Now we're going to factor this. And this will be x, 1, 1. Oh, that's interesting. This is again a perfect square trinomial that factored into that. So in a sense, I have 2 of the same. And this is, we just divide out. We divide both sides by 2 here. This cancels out. So we have essentially x plus 1 equals 0. We don't have to do it twice. So x equals -1. And that would be our solution set for number 14.